So Vision Sunday. Vision Sunday is so incredibly important. Here's why. Prophet Isaiah says this. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." All throughout Scripture, it is important for us to see what God is doing. It's important for us to visually see, to spiritually see what He is doing, to be reminded of what He has done so that we can look forward to what He will do. It's incredibly important that we see what God is doing in us, among us, and through us. So we need to sometimes physically see what God is doing spiritually. I love what Proverbs 29:18 says, and this is in the Message version, so it kind of breaks it down a little bit. If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. Anyone just going to want to just be honest and say, at some point in my life, I have been walking through the dark and I have tripped over something? Yeah, whether it's an animal, a person, or a broom, or whatever. Yes, we've done that. If you can't see where you're going, you're going to stumble all over yourself. But when they attend to what He reveals, they are most blessed. It is important that we have vision as a church, but it's also important that you have vision for your life as a follower of Jesus. It's important that you see, God, this is what you have done, and God, this is what you are doing. So Vision Sunday is an opportunity for us to see what God is doing and where He is leading us as a church. And so when we think about our vision, we think of it this way, that our vision is to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul and the city. We'll talk about that all throughout this morning, to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul and the city. But the reason why vision is so important, because we want to have the right kind of vision. We don't want to have a vision that just pumps people up. Because if it's just a vision that gets people excited, I don't know if you've ever been pumped up before about something, but at some point, that excitement, if there's no foundation and there's nothing to hold on to, it just kind of wanes. It's kind of like my celebration balloons. Yesterday at 4 o'clock, these balloons were jumping. I mean, they were here, taller than me. And then I came in this morning to find this, right? And what happens? Well, the helium in the balloons begins to atomize and it leaks out. I Googled this, okay? I might have messed that up. If I said it wrong, don't come afterwards, okay? It's just an illustration, all right? But here's the thing. If you live your life just trying to get pumped up, eventually it's going to leak. Because pumped up people leak. If you build your life off of hype, at some point it will leak. Pumped up people leak. Built up people last. And so when we think about our vision, we don't want to be like this. Where we jump around on stage and get you real excited. I may do that today because our vision does excite me. But at some point, if all we do is pump you up with just words and that's it, then eventually it'll leak. And 6 months from now, we'll look around and say, what are we doing anyways? Can I tell you one of the things that I think is so cool? This semester in city groups, we have the highest percentage of people in city groups that we've ever had. 70% of our Sunday attendance is connected in a city group. How cool is that? How cool is that? Over 200 adults. That's not even including students. If we go to students, we're like 90%, right? I mean, because our students y'all, listen. I would say if you're not doing anything on Wednesday night, you should come hang out with students. You got to get background check first, so just a heads up there. But students right now, city students, if you show up on a Wednesday night, it's jumping. It's awesome. It's awesome. Like, and let's just, if you serve in city students, will you raise your hand real fast? Like, just raise your hand. Come on, let's give it up for our city brothers that serve in city students. And that's not even including every single one of our kids is in a small group. And so we believe that there's so many ways that we can get built up and not just get pumped up. But one of those ways is to commit to come into a city group. And they're happening. I mean, it may be, like I'm playing ball today. That's my city group. Like I'm building relationships through playing ball and some prayer. Others are in the book of Ephesians, which makes me sound super shallow right now. There's so many different groups, but they're connecting in hopes that instead of being people that just get pumped up and excited for a month or two And then all of a sudden we're like, I'm not really about this Jesus thing anymore. No, we're actually trying to build people up. Because pumped up people leak, built up people last. Now I don't know what to do with these because they're just going to distract you for the rest of the time. So pause real fast. Okay. We want a vision that builds up, which is super important. In fact, I think today is really, really important for us in the context of where we're at, physically, geographically, at 220 East Solomon Street. And I'm going to tell the story of how we even got to this place, but we're here. The vision 2 years ago was for us to be a church that is here to stay, that puts down roots in the middle of where people are in our community and say, we're not going anywhere because we don't believe God is going anywhere, that he's here and he's here to stay. But what can happen is once you get a building and you look around and like, man, this is awesome. This is great. And there's still projects got to get done. You'll hear more about that. We didn't do some things because we couldn't pay cash for it. And we're like, hey, as the cash comes in, we're going to do them, right? But when we look around and we see, man, this is great. And God is so good. But what can happen so many times is when a church gets a building, the church begins to be about the building. And the church begins to make the building the most important thing. Like Wednesday night, students were in here and something got broken. What we don't want to happen is for us to lose our minds and say, how dare those students, right? It was an accident. It happened. It's okay. It's just a building. We're going to fix it. We'll take care of it. But at the end of the day, right? Like, at the end of the day, I'd rather have a lobby full of students and something that gets broken than a lobby that's empty, that's not being used. It's important, though, that we have vision. A vision that goes beyond this space, a vision that goes beyond this building, but also a vision that incorporates this building into the vision. It's important that we have this. In fact, our vision to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul in the city, it's been the vision from day one. But let's just talk about that word awaken. Can you put that back up there? How many of you know, and I spent a ton of time watching YouTube videos over the last couple of days of people that like wake people up and scare them, right? But most of them end in cuss words, so I couldn't show them this morning. But how many of you know that if you've ever woken someone up before, whether you shake them, drop water on them, clap, have a trumpet, how many of you know that when you wake somebody up, what does that mean? You got to be in the room, right? If you want to wake someone up, you got to be in the room. And so we believe this, that 5 years ago, God called us to be a Jesus movement that awakens the soul in the city, to be in the city, to awaken the city to who Jesus is. And so our prayer was very simple, but very massive. God, would you give us Griffin? We're asking, God, would you give us Griffin, all of Griffin? And we don't just mean our church, but the church. Would you give your church Griffin? And so what we've done over the last even 2 years is we've invited you over time to write names of people in Griffin, in your community, in your home, in your neighborhood, in your workplace that don't know Jesus, and begin to pray that God would awaken their hearts and their minds, and that God would put you in their life, put you in the room to see them awakened. We're not just going to sit in a building with a couple hundred chairs and say, we're just going to pray over these people and just stay here. No, we're going to move to where they are. We're going to go to where they are to wake them up. That's been our dream from the beginning. So the question I want to ask ourselves is going to frame out the rest of this time, because depending on how we answer this question is depending on how we move forward as a church. Depending on how you answer this question will determine how you move forward with our church. The question is Jesus still building his church? Is he? Is he? Well, to answer that question, we've got to start where the church kind of began, not for us, but the church. In fact, there's a passage interaction that Jesus is having with his disciples in Matthew chapter 16. We're going to be this morning. You can turn there if you want. It's going to be on the screen. There's a passage in there that Jesus goes to his disciples, and he asks them, he says, who do you say I am? And they begin to tell him, hey, people say you are this, and you are this. And he says, no. Who do you say I am? Peter, I love Peter. He's stubborn. He's just like, let's go, charge the mountain, run through a wall. Might be why I love him. Simon Peter replied, verse 16, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So there's a couple things that we need to talk about in this passage that informs to us this answer. Is Jesus still building his church? And so the first thing we see is that how Simon responds. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Make sure you drill that into your brains for the rest of this morning. He responds with this. And so Jesus responds and says, "Blessed are you," because it wasn't your flesh and your blood or your personal experience that has revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. Meaning this, that God has awakened you, Simon. God has awakened you to know who I am. And not just to know about me, but to actually know me. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That God actually awoken that. It's not from himself. It's not from what he's heard. It's actually from God. God has done something in your heart to awaken that in you. And I need you to see that because I've got to remove this verse real fast. And what I didn't want you to be like, oh, he's just taking verses out. No, I want us to talk about this, but I got to remove it so we can talk about the other two verses, okay? So we're just going to move that out of the way. Okay, thank you. So then it goes to verse 18. And Jesus is still talking, and he says, "I tell you, Peter, and I tell you, you are Peter." So Simon just got a name change, okay? I've only tried to change my name once. It was at high school. I tried to give myself a nickname, and I tried to give myself the nickname The Conclusion. Didn't stick because I am on the basketball court. I end things, right? That was the whole. Anyways, all right. Didn't stick. Jesus didn't give me that name. Jesus looks at Simon and says, "I'm changing your name right now." It says, "You are now Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So a couple words, and it's really important that we learn what these words mean. Peter, that name means Petros. Okay? In the original text, it's Petros, which just means a piece of stone or a little stone. Okay? So he calls him this, but then he says, "And on this rock," which is Petra, which means large stone, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So here's the question that I know you spent all night tossing and turning. You couldn't sleep at night. As you read this, you got to know the answer to this question. I'm going to pause. Oh, it's already circled on there. Okay. Who's the rock? Or what is the rock? Not Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. But who is the rock? Or what is this rock? Is it Peter? Is this where, hold on, man. All right, yep. Is it Peter? Thanks, Josh. Is it Peter? And so Jesus is saying, "Peter, I'm going to build my church on you. I'm going to build my church on you." Is that it? Well, the problem with that is we're going to see in a second that we see that actually that the church is not built on a man, it's built on Jesus. He's the cornerstone, right? And so that's not it. So then what is the rock? Well, the answer to that question is it is Peter, but it's Peter by way of his confession. You are Christ, the Son of the living God. And because God has awakened that in Peter's life, that means that this is the rock that Jesus is going to build his church on. That Jesus is going to build his church on. You can go to the next slide now, buddy. This means that Peter, God has awakened this in you. And you have confessed this, that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. And because of that, that is the rock. Not you personally, Peter. I'm not building my church on a man. But the fact that a man, God has awakened his heart to realize this good confession that Jesus Christ is Lord, that is what I'm building my church on. I'm building my church on a bunch of people that deserve hell, but God awakens something in their hearts and their minds to know that Jesus Christ is Lord. Now, did God use Peter in amazing ways? In amazing ways. But we've also got to see what he says next. He says, "On this rock, I will build my church." Jesus says, I'm going to build my church. If we double click on just this phrase, "I will build my church," and jump to Ephesians chapter 2, it gives us a little bit more context. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19 says this, "So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. You're built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together into a whole grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So what does Jesus say? Jesus says, I'm building my church. And this is what it looks like. I, Jesus, am the cornerstone that everything else is built on. But I'm also building it together. I'm also taking bricks. I'm also taking stories and lives, and I'm awakening them to who I am, and I'm building them into my church. This is how I build my church. So Jesus gives us the context and says, how am I going to build my church? I'm going to build it by way of people believing that I am the Son of God, and I died on the cross for their sins. And then he builds us together. So we are the church. Jesus will build his church. He promises to build his church. We've said all along, we don't want to miss him building his church because we're too busy building ours. And I think that's important because we've done a whole lot of physical building over the last 12 months. An emotional building over the last 26 months as a church as we bought this property. I mean, we've done a lot to even physically build, but we have to remind our hearts and our souls that we are not building our church. Jesus is building his. Now, we can try to build our church, and the sad thing is we'll miss everything that God wants to do through it. Jesus came to build his church. He didn't come to build a political class or an economic class or a racial class or a social class. He said, I don't have time for that. I've come to build my church, and it's going to look diverse, and it's going to look beautiful. And then he says this, if we go back to Matthew 16, he says, I'm not just going to build my church through the confession of Peter. I'm also going to tell you that the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. Now, here's the thing we have to understand about gates. Gates are not offensive weapons. They're defensive. Like, you know the video game the kids play now, Fortnite? Just kidding. You're like, wait, what? Fortnite. I know, guys. I'm kidding. Like, there's not a kid jumping on Fortnite and saying, you know what? I lost some of you guys now. Don't worry. It's a video game. And there's not a kid jumping on Fortnite saying, you know what? I'm going to use my V-Bucks, and I'm going to buy this gate because I need this gate as my weapon. No one's saying that. When you go into battle, you go into war, you're not looking at all the weapons that you can take and say, you know what I want? I don't need this. I don't need this. Give me that fence and that gate. That would be great. Gates are not offensive. Gates are defensive. So what does this tell us about the enemy? What this tells us about the enemy is that Jesus is saying there is going to be some territories that hell is going to want to fortify with some gates to protect it. That the enemy does not want the church in. Can I just tell you now, the enemy would love nothing more than to fortify your home and not allow Jesus in. The enemy would love nothing more for him to fortify your workplace and where you work and not allow the gospel to come in. The enemy would love nothing more than to build a big old fence and with a big old gate around the city of Griffin and keep the gospel out. And so this is what Jesus is saying. I'm going to build my church upon people that are confessing who I am. And here's the other thing. You got to know this, Peter. You got to know this, disciples. Any gate that the enemy puts up, I will kick down. And so this is what the church is for us, right? Our job as a church is not to sit back in our nice little room and play defense. As a church, we play offense. We move forward. We kick down gates in Jesus' name. I love that there's a direct connection between Jesus building his church and the gates of hell getting kicked down, which begins to give and inform our question, is Jesus still building his church? Well, the things that we need to look for then, are there gates that are being kicked down? And are there people that are being awakened to who Jesus is? And if they're not, then what are we doing? And if he's not building his church, what about all these names on all these bricks for the people that you love that are in your life? And the ones that are not on these bricks, what about them? So we asked two questions for us as a church on Vision Sunday. Are gates being kicked down? And our lives being awakened to who Jesus is? So when I think about the story of our church, I just think of it as a story of gates getting constantly kicked down. In 2018, we bought a FedEx truck. Get a backside view of it. Sorry, it's the only picture I could find. We bought a FedEx truck, and we wrapped it. And we actually asked people, hey, this first thing, we're not raising funds for like speakers or chairs or microphones or any of this stuff. We're actually raising funds to wrap an ice cream truck and to buy some freezers from Sam's and to continuously buy out Walmart with their ice cream sandwiches. Now Kroger, we love you, Kroger. And so we did that. So we wrapped. This is one of our first events at Atkinson Elementary. And we began to just pass out free ice cream. Because we believe this, that if anything will get you in the front door and build relationships with people, it's going to be free ice cream. Not like the creepy ice cream trucks that are driving through the neighborhood playing music, okay? Like we would show up to events and just hand out free ice cream. Why? Because we believe that Jesus can use ice cream to kick down some gates. And so we just bought ice cream. We bought ice cream. Guess how many pieces of ice cream we bought in the last 5 years? 115,891 pieces of ice cream. There's a lot of ice cream, right? Many of you, though, your stories began with a piece of ice cream here. Many of the baptisms began with a piece of ice cream. In fact, if we went through over the last 6 years and looked at how many gates God has used the ice cream truck to kick down and build relationships with people, I mean, it'd be amazing. So in 2018, we started handing out ice cream. God began to kick down these doors, and we began to be able to build trust in our city. And then we just said, okay, God, if you're going to awaken the soul in the city, then we need to be in the city to wake them up. And so, God, if you're going to use us, I'm going to put myself into meetings, and I'm going to learn, and I just want to learn about our city. And so one day I was in a meeting, at the downtown council meeting, and we learned that they had lost funding to the city to do movies in the park. And so this was 2018, before we ever had a building, a church service, any of this stuff. Barely had a name and a vision, but we knew God was calling us to awaken the soul in the city. And so they said, hey, would you be guys, they looked at, the head of the downtown council looked at me and said, hey, you want to take over movies in the park? And I was like, I mean, it's like, there's like 30 of us. Yeah, sure, let's do this. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what's movie in the park? This is our first movie in the park that we ever had. It was amazing. It was amazing. In fact, maybe for some of us, you were here in the park when we did this, but others, to jog your memory a little bit, this was 6 years ago. This is what it first looked like, our first interaction, physical interaction in downtown in the city. Check it out. So we've done over 35 movies in the park over the last 6 years. And you say, why hand out ice cream? Why do movies in the park? Because next week we're going to celebrate our 163rd, 164th, 165th, 166th, and 167th baptism. And half of those have still come from people that we've met through the ice cream truck or movie in the park. This is why we do these things. If we're going to wake people up, if God's going to wake people up, we got to be where people are. The story continues of gates that he began to bust down. In that very event that you just saw, a mom came up to my wife and said, thank you so much. Thank you so much for creating a space where black kids and white kids can come together, can party together, can have fun together, and it's okay and it's celebrated. Because it just didn't exist. Because one of the things that we heard when we were first planning a church was, hey, good luck trying to get black people and white people together in any kind of space. And before we'd even had a gathering, God gave us this space. He busted down a wall, he kicked it down and said, here's the start of something special. Here's the start of my kingdom in a different way. And so we got to see that. I got to roll. Here we go. Britt's going to come after me. All right, so Movies in the Park, God kicked down that door. He began to show us what racial reconciliation, what diversity, true trust, diversity built on trust looks like. And then we said, okay, we're not just going to build relationships through Movie in the Park. We want to invest in a school, just an inch wide and a mile deep. And so God led us to Orrs Elementary. So we started investing in Orrs Elementary. We started showing up consistently, encouraging teachers and showing up consistently. We've been doing this for 6 years. Tracy, wherever you're at, I don't know if you're in here or not, and you're going to come after me for saying this, but Tracy leads our effort and movement at Orrs Elementary and does an absolutely amazing job. Amazing job. We have mentors at Orrs, and the goal for the last 5 years has been to be the largest provider in Spalding County of mentors. I got an email this morning. We're adding 5 more mentors, right? And actually 7 more mentors, right? Is that true? 7 more mentors in the next few months to invest in Orrs Elementary. But here's the cool thing, is God placed it on our heart, really placed it on Warren's heart 4 years ago, that it just wouldn't be us investing in Orrs Elementary, but we would be able to empower and equip other local churches to invest in schools in the same way. And as of now, there is at least one local church connected to every single public school in Spalding County, investing in them in some capacity. And so God just kept, he busted down this door, he kicked down this door, he's built this trust. Next one, there's more. He keeps building it. In 2020, when we just believed that if we're a church for our city, then we better be for the churches in our city. And so in 2020, when just the racial division just was at the forefront, it's still there. It still exists, but it was just there. I called Robbie Milner, who I built a friendship with him, and just said, hey, I don't know what this looks like, but let's lock arms and let's fight for unity among our churches, because a divided community needs to see a united church. So on July 5th, 2020, we started this prayer walk on the bridge that connects 2 parts of our city. And it's ended up in us every year, 5 times a year. We gather with other local churches. And for a little while, it was just Robbie and me. And now there's 10 churches involved that are worshiping in some capacity, that are serving in some capacity, that are coming together and that are united. And we meet every month with these pastors. And we just pray and we talk about how's it going. We're trying to build trust, because sadly, trust is the most unvalued, disvalued, I don't know where I'm going with that, commodity among churches. It's trust. So it's trying to build trust back. God, would you bust down this door of the enemy trying to divide our churches? Would you bust down that gate? He's doing it in Jesus' name. And then, 2021, the county came to us and said, hey, listen, the board for the rec basketball in our county just had to step down. Some things went on, and we were wondering if you guys would be interested in taking over rec basketball in our county. And we said, in my head at first I was like, yeah, it sounds amazing, let's do it. And then I was like, that seems like a lot. So we slowed down a little bit and said, God, do you want us to do this? We started asking the question, God, if we got to be in the room to wake people up, if we need to be in the community to wake people up, and there's certain parts of this community that we've been praying, God, would you help us to build trust in? God, it seems like rec basketball is the best way to do that right now. And so we finished our 3rd year of leading Spalding United Youth Basketball. We don't publicize that. In fact, if you go on Spalding United Youth Basketball's website, our stuff isn't, we're a sponsor on that. But we want to build relationships through that. The season's about to roll around. Every season we've been able to serve over 300 kids and coaches that do not attend this church. That's a whole lot of families and a whole lot of people. If God's going to wake up a city, we're not just going to do it by sitting in these walls. We're going to do it out there. Hey, basketball season's rolling around. It's time to jump in. And so you're going to hear more about that over the next few weeks, few months. I want you to dive in with us and do this. So then, all right. Okay. 220 East Solomon Street. God brought this property to us, and there was a lot of pushback because they wanted lofts here. And I understand why. I'm in a lot of the meetings, and Heads and Beds downtown actually brings a lot of value to downtown. And so I met with a few people, and I said, hey, listen, I want you guys to know that we're under contract on 220 Solomon Street. And they said, listen, we really wanted lofts there. And I said, listen, I want our downtown to thrive. I want lofts too. I think it'd be amazing for downtown. But I also know this. I'm confident that a few lofts in downtown in this space are not going to transform a city. But I am confident in a church on mission for Jesus will transform a city. And so, I said, two things can be true. Let's find a place to put lost. But we really felt like this is what God's doing. And it's sitting in that meeting with all those people, and they began to walk through everything that I've just walked you through, of the gates that God has busted open over the last 3 years, for the last 5 years of our church. And after they walked and they went through all those things, they said, you know what, man, we want City Church downtown. We want you guys here. And so we've been on this journey, and now we're here. And we've talked about the tornadoes that came through and how God used this space. 1 million pounds of supplies came through this space. We served over 14,000 families and 2,000 volunteers served in 2023. And now we're here. One of the statements that were told to us in the very beginning was, I don't know why you're going to plant a church in Griffin. Things only go to Griffin to die. Your church will never grow in Griffin. And my response is, you're right, my church will not, but Jesus' church will. And so here's the question. As I'm wrapping up, is Jesus still building his church? Well, gates of hell will not prevail. But the next question we got to ask, are there people that God is awakening? And there's story after story of people that I could tell you about, but one of them specifically is it's a guy that comes to our church. His name's Clay. And 2 years ago, Clay wrote a name on a brick, praying that God would awaken this person. It was his brother. His name was Robbie. And he prayed, and he's prayed, and he's prayed, and he's prayed. And then about a year after he wrote a name on a brick, Robbie just showed up to church. It didn't even, and he was like, Robbie's like, wait, you go here? You go here? It's crazy. And God just kept working on Robbie's heart, working on Robbie's heart, working on Robbie's heart, working on Robbie's heart. And about 6 months ago, Robbie came to me and said, hey, man, I think I want to be baptized. And so we sat and we walked through what it means to be baptized, what it means for God to awaken us and what he calls us to follow him. And at the end of that, he said, man, that's a lot. I need to pray through this. And about 3 months later, Robbie said, I'm ready to be baptized. And so we asked the question, are the gates of hell getting kicked down? And are people confessing that Jesus is Lord? Well, all we got to do is just watch this. I believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, my Savior, my Lord. Is Jesus still building his church? You have to answer that question for yourself. I would say emphatically, yes, he still is building his church. And so what does that mean for us? If Jesus is not done building his church, then we are not done being his church. If Jesus is not done building his church, then we are not done being his church, which means the places and the gates that he kicks down, all those things that we walk through, those gates that he's kicked down, we're still in those spaces because we believe that that's what God's going to use. And so if Jesus is not done building his church brick by brick, then we're not going to be done being his church. And so two questions, and I'm going to wrap this up, are two things, two prayers that we can pray. And then I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to pray for us. Warren and Jonathan, I'm going to invite you guys up just to kind of close it out with me, okay? Here we go. Can we end on that? Does that sound good? Two prayers. First prayer is this: Jesus, build your church. Would you commit to saying, Jesus, build your church, not our church? God, would you build your church? The second question is a little bit more difficult. Jesus, our second prayer, Jesus, build my life in such a way that it builds your church. Reorient my life in such a way that you place me around people that do not know Jesus, so that you would bust down those walls in their hearts and their minds and awaken them to who Jesus is. Build your church in that way, but God, would you build my life in that way? So parents, can I just tell you, if you are focused on the dollar right now and you work, and your kids don't know Jesus and are not growing in Jesus, then maybe you need to ask God, would you build my life in a different way, build my heart in a different way so I could show my kids Jesus? Next Sunday, there's a dad that's getting baptized, and I sat with him on Friday. He said, the reason why I'm getting baptized is because of what Jesus has done for me, and I have kids, and I want them to know Jesus, but I know it starts with me. Jesus, build my life in such a way that it builds your church. God, build our finances, build our time, build how we serve in such a way that it builds your church. Because if Jesus is not done building his church, then we are not done being his church. Let's not be done. City Church, we are not done. So God, right now,